Ambition, Potential and Growing Pains. Va a estar con nosotros, me gustaría que subiera al escenario Daniel Knapp, él es Chief Economist de IAB Europe. Daniel, bienvenido, welcome.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. I'm the Chief Economist at IAB Europe, the trade association of digital advertising. IAB Spain is a member of that as well. And I've been analyzing the retail media landscape for quite a while. So we're providing statistics, forecasts, outlook, etc. And you all know how hyped this market has been over the last few years. But there are increasingly some growing pains that we need to resolve to ensure that this market can unlock its full potential. So today I want to speak to you about the ambition, the potential, and also the growing pains that we're seeing emerging and how we can resolve them. We just published in Mexico in Cologne a few weeks ago the large trade show on digital advertising, new data on retail media in Europe. So this is about the size of the market. You can see behind me the total advertising market across all media in 2023, it grew by 6.1%. Retail media grew 4 times as fast, 22%. So there's huge momentum here. We see budgets moving into retail media from other media and also net new budgets from trade marketing, etc. coming in. This growth here is going to be carried forward in the future. So here is our new update. We can see right now here, this year, the European market is going to be worth around 13 billion euros for retail media. And you can see our forecasts are continuing and we're expecting nearly 31 billion by 2028. That's a lot of money being poured into this kind of emerging channel. But you can see that our forecasts have changed. So here is our 2023 forecast, our last year forecast. This is our 24 forecast. You can see some changes. So we, 3 things in particular. So number 1, we increased the base because we realized retail media is bigger than many of us think. There's last mile delivery companies, etc. Some local measurement companies are not including offsite media, etc. So we have added that. But we can also see a little dip here. So the market increases here, but a little bit of slower growth here, in particular because of Germany. As you all know, when you read the press, the German economic engine is stuttering. And we're seeing slower growth overall in German advertising. This is also reflected in retail media. Plus, that's the first thing about the growing pains. A lot of retailers are trying to move to offsite media, trying to forge partnerships. But these take a lot of time, in particular in countries where there's a very strict interpretation of the GDPR and data protection reigns supreme. To give you an example, I worked with a few German retailers recently as a consultant to build offsite partnerships. And to sign a single partnership, get that through legal, it took 14 months. And no money has flown yet. So you can see that these kind of also encrusted structures, what does the retail media team do? What is its competences? Where does legal sit? Is legal a co-pilot of the retail media team or are they sitting somewhere else in the organization? Can really hamper growth quite quickly when companies realize they want to move into offsite. But then you can see at the end of our forecast here, additional growth, particularly coming from so-called second mover markets. Think of Turkey, for instance. Think of Eastern Europe, where retail media networks are opening up. Often, they're now networks managed and scaled by large grocery companies, for instance, from Western Europe, or last mile delivery companies, etc., coming through here. So it's a bit of a push and pull on these new forecasts, and of course, we expanded them now to 2028. But what we also did is we dug into the individual markets. How big are the key markets in Europe? And of course also, we have Spanish data for you. We see Spain about here, right? UK is the largest market, followed by Germany, which is quite interesting, by the way, because the UK digital advertising market is 2.4 times larger than the German digital advertising market, although there are 20 million more people in Germany. This is because they are more innovative, there's more competition among consumers and brands, etc., whereas Germany is still very much TV and also still quite newspaper-centric, actually. So this narrow gap here, as you can see here, this isn't a 2.4x gap, means there are very strong endemic retailers in Germany. Think of Zalando, think of Otto, think of Rewe, the large supermarket chains, etc., which are moving into retail media. France really was one of the pioneering markets. Think of Carrefour, think of Cdiscount and others who've built retail media networks. We think Spain is around 525 million euros. The number is close to the IAB Spain number, slightly different. We don't disagree with the number at all. We think it's a very good number, but we added a few things, in particular on offsite and data monetization, which you typically don't do in an ad spend study. But you can see Italy, which is an advertising market that's larger than Spain overall, is actually lagging behind Spain, as Italian retailers have been slow to embrace this. Netherlands, it's a small market, but it has a strong retail media proposition. In particular, Albert Heijn Delhaize, the massive supermarket chain, is a leader. Bol.com, their own Amazon.com, if you will, is very strong. We see some discounters like Jumbo, etc., moving in as well. And we also have data from Poland, which is skewed not so much on grocery retailers, as in many other markets, but really on their own marketplace. So again, like in the Netherlands with Bol.com, Poland has a company called Allegro, which is extremely strong, its own kind of marketplace participant. And we can see this strong growth, in particular of the marketplaces and the local retailers, if we split out this market. Some of you might think, wow, these are really huge numbers. How does this add up? Well, of course, the open secret to all of this is that Amazon takes a huge share of all of this. But I think what's remarkable is that this Amazon share, now of 74%, it's slowly going down over time as others are ramping up their retail media offerings. So we see stronger growth in the smaller players, in endemics, etc. It's always a little bit of an accounting question, because with Amazon, the question, of course, is what's retail media and what's something else, right? So we haven't included Twitch, for instance, or also Amazon Prime, but of course increasingly the Amazon DSP data or the Amazon kind of on-site kind of transaction data is going to power that as well. So the lines are a little bit blurry. That's I think something we have to bear in mind, and spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about that in a second when I dive into the relationship between retail media and television. But it's overall good news for the European ecosystem, because unlike social media, what we can see in retail media, it's not a winner-takes-all market. There's huge potential for endemic players, European endemic players, to really mark their ground here. And you can, I think, clearly see this when you look at the role of Amazon and other players in different markets. So we're splitting things out a little bit, and you can see in Poland the Allegro position, and you can see in, where are we, in the Netherlands, the Bol.com position, quite here. And also here, I think Carrefour Unlimited with a quite strong share in France. But retail media has many things. And some say it's a set of channels or formats, display, sponsored product ads, etc. And others are saying, well, there's also data to it. And I think it's much more than that. It's more like an infrastructure on which media can be bought and sold, and also it offers channels. Right now, at the moment, it's pretty much concentrated on search. So sponsored product ads, etc. This dominates retail media currently. And we're seeing other formats, I lump this together, on retail, display, and service. So service could be data sales and other things, taking a minority role. But you might wonder, why are these charts moving in this way? Look at the beginning of retail media. We just came out of the pandemic. Everybody was buying online. Retail media was really exploding and professionalizing very quickly. You still had a lot of retail display data here. This wasn't because the retail media display offering was so sophisticated. Many retailers at that stage, they had a retail media offering only in name, not in practice. What they really did is they sold banner ads against their audiences. They didn't sell ads against SKUs, and that's the huge difference between publishers and retailers. One sells ads against audiences, the other against SKUs. So when you look at some of the ads text files, many retailers had huge, very long files to work with programmatic partners, but they just sold audience ads, not retail media ads. And the shrinking of this here actually is an indication for professionalizing, as they moved from being publishers or aggregators of audiences to starting to sell ads against products, against SKUs. And of course, sponsored products are the easiest, often most frictionless way of doing that. Hence, we saw this grow. But of course, here, the share of other formats grows again as it becomes clear that there's a limit to the prices retailers can charge. There's a limit also to the inventory that they have available actually to sell on sponsored product ads. So they're looking at display ads, checkout ads, data and insight services, etc. And this is what increasingly will make up a share of the total retail media pie. We can see this also over time, just a different perspective to show you where's the growth within retail media. It's pretty much driven from search right now. We can even see this here, very strong spike here, in particular as many more networks have launched in 2024. They start with the low friction search product, but then you can see the tides are kind of turning, and at the end of our forecast period, these things, offsite data, programmatic, etc., are becoming much, much more prominent. And my prediction is that we're going to see much more innovation, in particular in opening up demand paths to retail media. Right now, many retailers are working with one technology provider who's also, in a sense, acting as a gatekeeper of bundling inventory, of selling it, but it's not true programmatic in the sense that it's not open to demand. Increasingly, retailers realize that they are reliant on very few demand channels and very few clients. So in some cases, over 50% of the revenue comes from 2 or 3 advertisers. That can become quite volatile over time, because if one of those breaks away and negotiates a different deal and they're all becoming very, very price conscious, your own retail media ambitions start to stutter and fall away. So diversification is key, and opening up programmatically is going to be a key component of this. So expect the next year or so quite a few announcements on true programmatic for retail media. Let's take a different perspective on this market. I mentioned that retail search is a key driver for retail media. But it's so big already that if we put retail search together with the classic search, what you know from Google and Bing, already today, it's mainly Amazon, 23% of all search revenues we're gathering in the European digital advertising market are coming from retail media. And that's going even further. So that also puts huge questions on advertisers. What is my search strategy? And how do I change that, in particular when in the classic search, it's increasingly AI enabled, that you're increasingly getting answer summaries. You're not being referred to a web page anymore where you look at the product, but you're getting the answers delivered directly in the search engine. And I think this creates completely different search experience for different types of things. And this, in a sense, vertical search that you have within products is going to concentrate more on retail media, fueled by the shift to AI-based answers, let's say on where should I go on holiday, how do I fix my sink, etc. These kind of things, which isn't what retail media is for. So our prediction is that the change of the search world towards AI is pushing more budgets into product vertical search, which will benefit retail media. But European retailers need to do more to really unlock the potential of this market. What you can see here is revenue diversification. What is the value of retail media revenue generated from non-media solutions? And as I said before, retail media isn't just a set of media channels, but something else. And we can see in the US, it's far more coming from non-media solutions, data, etc. There's some outliers in Europe, but overall, data protection and the conservatism in building data businesses means that we are leaving significant money and potential on the table in retail media. And I think we must overcome this, because often retailers price performance or outcomes through data already into their business. You have very high CPMs, but sometimes those outcomes, or more often than it should be, those outcomes aren't actually being delivered. There's little measurement available. So providing advertisers with the instrument and the arms to understand what incremental growth retail media is delivering, or also which products work well, which one should I be doubling down as a manufacturer of shampoos, etc. This kind of new relationship that data can enable is something that will propel the retail media flywheel, but we haven't fully unlocked it yet. This is also why I think the so-called landing zone appears still a little off. So here we have anonymized because we don't want to call out any companies. It's the IAB. We have probably 60 plus retailers here. The light ones are US and the dark ones are Europe. And what we're looking here is retail media as a share of online gross merchandise value, as a kind of metric on how mature, how evolved is the retail media business. Note this metric isn't always the best, but it's the simplest and most commonly understood, and is increasingly used in accounting and in kind of just in evaluation terms to understand the maturity of a retail media business. And you can see here this dark colored zone. This is the typically 4-year landing zone when retail media teams go to their executives and say, this is where we can go. It's typically around this area here, between 3.5% to around 4.5%, 5% of online GMV. These are often set very loosely as targets where they want to go. But we can see, in particular in Europe, there's still a gap between the ambition and the reality. So professionalizing, more data sales, moving into offsite is going to be crucial actually to get this done. Also to overcome the silos between trade marketing and between retail media. These are very different worlds. Often trade marketing, as you know, it's done in barter deals. It isn't really accounted for as media. But many salespeople, of course, have their own incentives to keep those deals going. So there's a lot of organizational change required, and a lot of things like creating a joint P&L that lifts all boats and incentivizes everyone in the company to sell retail media. We're now seeing the same is already happening on the advertiser side, even a little bit faster to reallocate budgets, but retailers themselves are often more conservative. And some of the businesses you can see here, they're in effect trade marketing companies that have just put the new sexy label, retail media, on their business without changing much. And this really needs to change so that we can get into this landing zone. But mathematically, it's pretty possible because e-commerce after the pandemic isn't growing as strong anymore. And I showed you in the beginning, retail media is growing 22% plus. So over time, this gap is obviously going to shrink. We can see a little bit of the differences if we compare the US and Europe. On the left we have the US, on the right we have Europe, and they're grouped companies, again online GMV, into different types of companies. Last mile delivery companies, you know, your Uber Eats for instance, or your delivery heroes, marketplaces, Amazon and others, and retailers, often brick and mortar or digital native retailers. Remarkably, what you can see is that on last mile delivery, and on marketplaces, well, here's a bit of an outlier here, but US and Europe aren't that different. Why is that? Well, it's much easier to build an advertising business when you're a marketplace, particularly when you're selling to small and medium-sized companies. Think of your kebab or your shawarma shop that needs to deliver things via Uber Eats or something like that. In a sense, you have to advertise. It's advertise or perish. It's part of the overall bundle. Advertising is like digital rent. You need to rent your shop window, otherwise you don't sell. And some critics are saying that, well, Amazon has moved into that as well, that you need to even continually keep your advertising pressure. You can't build your brand, but you have to price it in all the time to sell. Whereas for retailers, it's slightly different. You have a more limited product portfolio, you have brands that are often well-known, Unilever, Colgate, Palmolive, etc., which have their own brands, so you are not in this advertising or perish mode. And this makes it harder for retailers to scale things up, in particular as e-commerce and retail media teams are often in a kind of push and pull situation. But we can see the European retailers here are pretty behind the US still. And part of it is, of course, scale, but also data protection, fragmentation, conservatism, etc., although we do have leaders like Albert Heijn, Carrefour, etc. Here are the average lines. A story that you've heard very often is, of course, something like this. A few press clippings. Retail media will be bigger than television. And of course, television is the ultimate comparison because television was the brand advertising medium since the emergence of mass brands in the 1960s. There was a symbiotic relationship between mass media and mass brands. They needed each other to grow. So now when forecasts come out saying retail media is going to be bigger than TV, it actually means nothing more than retail media will take the crown of advertising. But is this really substantiated? Can this really be the case? So let us walk through something, and to do that I went back a little bit in time before even I was born, to 1980 in Germany. You can see here the revenue of linear television, so I've stripped off all AVOD, CTV, etc. Right? Linear television in Germany from 1980 up to forecast 2028. And it's quite remarkable. You can see here a growth inflection point starting 1987 up to the year 2000. That's 14 years. So we build an average growth rate. How much on average did the television in Germany grow in this 14-year period? 13.5%. And luckily, 7 is just the half of 14, but we also have 7-year growth of retail media as a comparison. So in the first 7 years, it grew by nearly 20%. So when many people are now looking at this massive ascent of retail media, they think, wow, these growth rates seem wild, seem crazy. But look at this here, and then compare this with retail media. You have non-Amazon stuff in the yellow line and everything, including Amazon, on the dark line here. And if you compare the average growth rates then with TV, it's pretty clear that retail media is doing now what television did in the 1980s. And I think that is a remarkable development that we're seeing, which often isn't appreciated. And why can that be? I think we need to look on the advertiser side to understand why. You have behind me 2 ranking lists of the top 25 advertisers globally. Once for 2022, and then 20 years before that in 2002. This 2002 list is here. Let's focus our attention on this list. We can see light and dark blue. The ones in dark blue were also in the top 25 20 years before. But all the companies here in the light blue, largest advertisers in the world, weren't in the rankings, or maybe in some cases didn't even exist 20 years ago. And if you just look at the names, Amazon, Samsung, Alphabet, Booking.com, for instance, JD.com, Walmart. These are all companies that have not necessarily grown up typically with the idea of television. They have very different perspectives on how to build brands and what media channels to use. So we are dealing with advertisers that are not coming out of a legacy world, and often CMOs who aren't either. And this is very apparent, not just in these new kind of top companies, but overall. And of course, in the age of AI, we needed to look at earnings calls from advertisers and analyze them via an AI. So what we did is we built a large language model and read the quarterly filings, the quarterly conference calls from over 1,000 companies, over 8 quarters. What is the CMO? What's the CFO? What are they talking to the investment analysts about marketing? What's coming out of that? And here are 8 companies, and I focused on here all kind of FMCG companies because they just talk a lot about marketing, right? Pepsi, Nestle, etc. And I highlighted here a few points that you speak about branding a lot, but they're not necessarily attaching branding to television, but more to digital. They're speaking about branding and data and targeting in the same vein. That a couple of years ago was diametrically opposed, 2 different things. It's now coming together. They're speaking about AI, but also about outcomes, i.e. advertising needing to pay onto top and bottom line business objectives. CFO metrics, not CMO metrics. And these are just 8 examples, but the same themes are recurring time and again across all these different reports. And companies are investing a lot. So here you can see some examples actually of where they are, sorry, let's go back here. They are investing a lot. They're actually spending more on marketing right now than they're growing overall in their business. So if budgets aren't arriving, it means the media seller is in the wrong business. But we can see out of television, Budgets are moving into retail media. Linear TV is the biggest media channel source for shifts to retail media. That, of course, doesn't include trade marketing, but for everything that is declared media, it's moving from television based on the argument I showed you just now. Traditional ad channels as well. Programmatic, of course, also. Think of cookie problems, third-party accountability, etc., and others too. When we look at the total growth in the future, bearing what advertisers want, outcomes, but also branding and data and measurement, it's no surprise that two channels stand in the foreground. Retail media, which in principle delivers this, and of course also CTV as a data-enabled way of television that is way up the funnel. Retail media has the problem that is still being perceived of focusing a lot on bottom of the funnel stuff. But when you compare this to the analogy I just made on retail media being bigger than TV, a lot of public discussions focus on retail media versus television. But I believe that this migration away from linear television to retail media will in the future also be something that combines retail media and CTV. And you can clearly see this when you look at, for instance, Walmart that bought smart TV manufacturer Vizio, clearly seeing they need to do an Amazon play, they need to take their retail media data and move it up into the marketing funnel. So partnerships, as you can see here, are abound in very different areas to really understand that retail media data needs to build its whole ecosystem below, middle, and top of the funnel. But this is far more advanced in the US than in Europe. We need to be faster at building partnerships to scale out retail media. Because partnerships actually help a lot. We have different parties here, advertiser, retailer, and publisher, and they all have pros and cons with their data, right? The advertiser has first-party audience from the CMN data, but low visibility on who's actually buying stuff. Despite more direct sales from Unilever, etc., they're still buying through intermediaries. So they need the stores, the retailers, to tell them who's buying what. The retailer has a lot of very granular purchase data, but lack of audience reach, in particular when you want to go off-site, right? When you want to target something for a shampoo or deodorant, the numbers shrink a lot, and you kind of need the partnership of publishers to scale things out. Publishers have a massive audience reach and some data, but the limited amount of logged in users, and actually they can just see what users read and not what they buy. So everyone has advantages and barriers, and combining these together in partnerships via clean rooms, for instance, or one-on-one partnerships can be hugely important to, again, fuel the retail media flywheel. But retailers need to do more to unlock this potential. We did a survey to understand what are the barriers hindering you investing more in your retail media proposition. Key thing is operational elements. How do we measure performance? How do we use data, etc.? Retailers are often, not always, are often still not very good at that. Huge upfront costs, clean rooms, CDPs, etc. How does ad tech really work? They're often not ad ops people. How can I get internal sign-off, training and staff in particular? Less so in Europe, more in the US, interestingly, as many retailers are, of course, based in the middle of nowhere somewhere. But the advertising industry is on Madison Avenue, and we are all a very social industry. So when you move to a retailer and you're suddenly in the 8th office in the 3rd floor, 10th to the right, you suddenly lose touch with the industry, and it becomes quite difficult actually to thrive in such an environment. But this is the key thing. How do I actually run and manage a media business? Retailers are lacking that. And you can see this when you look at some anonymized data on how the market is kind of skewed in a sense, right? And you can see here, Germany, retail media advertising revenue by player. Those who have big teams who have figured out how to monetize data, they are here. But here are a lot of retailers that only generate single-digit million euros of revenue, who slightly cynically may have spent more on consulting services from McKinsey than they've actually on retail media, than they've actually earned with retail media in a given year. And a lot is because these operational elements haven't been sorted yet. And the key reason behind this, of course, many are not by DNA media companies. If you look at an example, for instance, 5% of Walmart revenue comes from advertising, whereas one of Europe's largest broadcasters, RTL, it's 65%. So it's a very different mindset. And here you can see how it looks like on the pricing side. Retailers are not good at measurement and performance yet, but they charge extremely high CPMs, which price in the promise of performance. And what we're now seeing is that advertisers with their auditors are putting this under pressure to move this down. But the client portfolio for retailers isn't growing because they're stuck to their endemic clients. Non-endemic is still kind of slowly growing only, etc. So a few things need to be sorted out in order for this to keep growing. And fragmentation makes it hard to choose. Here's the buyer perspective. So you did a survey with how many retail media networks are you actually working as a buyer? Most actually work with 2 to 3 networks because it's so difficult and so complex to manage more retail media networks. There are little standards, we're working on this as IAB Europe, but to compare performance between retailers is quite difficult. And there's also choice paralysis. We counted. There are 113 retail media networks speaking today in the EMEA region. And it isn't stopping because suddenly the wider world of commerce or retail media-like propositions are emerging. Financial media networks and others. Revolut, Klarna, PayPal, Marriott has its own retail media network, and American United Airlines as well. More and more is coming. So more networks because everybody realizes bundling data and inventory in a safe first-party world is the future, but there's too much fragmentation. So it's really like this for many buyers. They just capitulate. So there are 3 areas I think we need to focus on to really propel this market forward. The first is standardization to increase interoperability. Second, diversification of revenue streams, do that more aggressively, that data protection, legal, e-com, data teams and retail media teams work more smartly together to build this all out. And then that we drive external partnerships to ensure that retail media really becomes not just a media channel, but an infrastructure powering other media as well. Once we have done that, I think we are well set for the future. And then this 31 billion, which I mentioned, doesn't seem to, for 2028, doesn't seem to be so far stretched. But remember, forecasts are always an indication of possibility if all things go well, and they are not a seal of approval that the market will hit these 31 billion. These construction sites need to be resolved for this to be the case. And with that, thank you very much, and I think we have some time for questions.
So if you want to make a question to Daniel, we have a few minutes. Okay. Si le podemos pasar el micrófono, por favor. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. Do you think that the fact that Amazon, Prime Video, Netflix, and all the platforms are opening the advertisement will change the picture?
So I think this Game of Thrones that we're seeing is quite important, in particular from the big players. It's changing the picture in various ways. Of course, I think what Amazon has done in retail media, it's likely going to do in television as well. So more pressure on broadcasts, in particular ease of use, bringing more advertisers into the television ecosystem, use of data, etc. On the other hand, we're seeing some very interesting and weird, in a sense, alliances happening because even the large players realize they're not good at everything. Look, for instance, at the recent partnership between TikTok and Amazon. Amazon is great at products, but Amazon isn't really good at product discovery. How do I find stuff? TikTok has a TikTok shop. It wants to sell directly via social commerce. Big thing in Asia, slowly coming to Europe as well. But they're not very good at selling products yet. But they're really good at discovery. Their algorithm is the kind of secret sauce. So there's now an e-commerce partnership between TikTok and Amazon where, in a sense, you can buy directly via TikTok discovery on Amazon. And this combination, I think, is quite interesting because even the big guys realize they don't do everything right. This has huge implications, though, for European retailers who sometimes still, because now they have first-party data, have this hubris that they think they are the new Meta or the new Google in the world. No, not the case. We need far more collaboration and maybe also some data and data alliances and bundling in Europe to compete with those kind of setups. And also, why not also work, with TikTok, with Instagram, etc., integrate into social media feeds. I think one thing that is often not understood is how big the creator economy has become. Some retailers think of beauty, for instance, or travel. They work a lot with creators, but the creator teams tend to be separate from retail media. If you bring together your creators, your beauty creators, for instance, with your retail media proposition, you can, in your own niche, create something like this partnership. If this happens more, I think also the non-super big guys have a good chance to compete. But I think we need to take the creator economy more seriously as a way of purchasing products.
Thank you.
Yeah, what would be the next smartest move for a national broadcaster who wants to take its steps into retail media? What would be the right partnerships? What would be the right constructs, the ideas of how to push it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question on broadcast. It depends. First of all, it depends on what kind of your clients are as a broadcaster. You work with a retailer, let's say in a certain vertical. Let's say again beauty. Do you have direct beauty clients, or do they come via an agency? And that already determines kind of how you do the partnership, right? Do you work with the retailer directly, or do you work with an agency? And then maybe that beauty data is great, although I don't have many beauty retailers, beauty advertisers, but I can use it for my non-endemic clients. I can infer from beauty data, is a family growing? Are people getting wealthier? I.e., should I advertise? Should Volkswagen advertise a different car on my television channel? That's kind of a first consideration. The second one is, how do I share my data? Directly with a retailer in a one-on-one relationship? Do I do it via an agency? Do I use a clean room construct, etc.? Then the question is, who sells this? Do I sell the inventory powered with retailer data? Or does actually the retailer sell television inventory? And this becomes quite political, but also quite interestingly spicy, because there's now some discussions in the television world that not all television sales teams are geared to sell outcome-based media, what advertisers want. So why not let a retailer sell part of the television inventory? In particular, in cases where the retailer might also be the largest client, right? Think of let's say, a super large national retailer. It might be now via an agency the largest client of a broadcaster. So that retailer might think, okay, the agency gets some volume-based discounts from the broadcaster. Why don't I do the same? Go directly to the broadcaster, have a deal with the broadcaster and say, hey, let's do a little experiment. Give me that part of the inventory and I sell it on. So that's another, I think, spin that one needs to consider. Who sells stuff? And could there be some experiments in innovative sales models, in particular to drive outcomes?
Okay. Thank you so much, Daniel. We don't
Pleasure.
have more time. We have to start the next panel, so thank you. A big applause for him.